The silence in space was broken only by the dying gasps of the Catherian. Colony ship Serenity's Hope. Captain Zektar stood on the bridge, watching the red warning lights flash across every console. His forearms moved quickly over the control panels, but nothing responded anymore. The main engines had been dead for 6 days now, and the backup power systems were failing one by one. 300,000 souls depended on him, and he was running out of time. The ship carried entire families who had left their homeworld seeking a better life on the frontier colonies. Now they drifted helpless in the empty space between star systems with nowhere to go and no way to get there. Captain, the atmospheric. Processors are down to 12% efficiency, reported his second officer Velena. Her voice carried the fear they all felt but tried to hide. At this rate, we have maybe 18 hours before the air becomes unbreathable. Zektar closed his primary eyes and tried to think. They had sent distress signals on every frequency they knew, but space was vast and empty. The nearest Catherian outpost was weeks away, even if their engines worked. No merchant ship traveled these lonely routes, and the military never patrolled this far from civilization. In the lower decks, families huddled together in the growing cold. The heating systems had failed first, and now the ship felt like a tomb. Children asked their parents when they would reach their new home, and the adults had no answers to give. The elderly and sick were already showing signs of the failing life support. Soon the healthy would follow. "Sir, we could try the emergency beacon," suggested Navigation Officer Keshra. "Send it out on all frequencies and hope someone hears it." "Who would hear it out here?" Zektar replied. "We are between systems in empty space. Even if someone picked up the signal, they would never reach us in time." But what choice did he have? The captain looked around his bridge at officers who had served with him for 20 years. They had explored new worlds together and brought colonists to distant planets. Now they faced their final mission, and it might end in failure. "Prepare the emergency beacon," he ordered. "Send our position and situation on every band. Include the number of civilians aboard and request immediate evacuation assistance. Offer our cargo hold full of rare minerals as payment to any ship that responds." The beacon went out into the void, carrying their desperate message. It traveled at light speed in all directions, hoping to find anyone who might help. The signal contained everything about their situation. Dead engines failing life support 300,000 people, including 60,000 children. Please help us before it is too late. Meanwhile, 18 light years away, Jake Martinez was having a quiet night shift at Luna Station. The big communication arrays pointed out into deep space, listening for signals from Earth's far colonies and trading partners. Most nights, he heard routine traffic between merchant ships and the occasional message from exploration vessels. Tonight felt different, though. His instruments picked up something unusual, coming from a region of space where no human ships should be. The computer began working to decode the alien transmission, and Jake leaned forward in his chair. First contact protocols required him to immediately alert his supervisor. But something about this signal felt urgent. The translation program worked slowly, converting the alien language into English. When the first words appeared on his screen, Jake felt his heart skip. This was not a greeting or trade offer. This was a cry for help from people who were dying. "Emergency beacon transmission received," he read aloud to make sure he understood correctly. "Colony ship Serenity's Hope requesting immediate evacuation assistance. 300,000 civilians aboard. Life support failing. Estimated time remaining 18 hours. Will provide payment in rare minerals to any vessel rendering aid." Jake immediately activated the priority alert system. Within minutes, his supervisor arrived, followed by a team of linguists and communications experts. They verified the translation and confirmed the signal was genuine. This was really happening somewhere out there. People were dying, and had sent their last hope into space. "Get me Admiral Chong at Terra Command," ordered Communications Director Carol Stevens. "She needs to see this immediately." The signal traveled up through military channels, reaching the highest levels of human command within an hour. Admiral Lisa Chong read the decoded message 3 times before calling an emergency meeting. Her staff assembled quickly in the secure briefing room, where decisions about humanity's future were made. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have received a distress call from an alien colony ship," she began. 300,000 civilians are facing death from life support failure. The ship is 18 hours from complete atmospheric breakdown and located at coordinates that would take our fastest ships nearly 2 days to reach. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Captain Ryan Cooper of the UES Endeavour was the first to speak. "Admiral, my ship could attempt a rescue run. We might be able to save some of them if we push our engines past safe limits." "How many could you evacuate?" Admiral Chong asked. "Maybe 10,000 if we stripped out everything non-essential and packed them in like cargo," Cooper replied. "It would be dangerous and uncomfortable, but they would be alive." Admiral Chong looked around the room at her officers. These were people who had dedicated their lives to protecting humanity and exploring the galaxy. Now they faced a choice that would define what kind of species humans wanted to be. They could save a few thousand aliens and feel good about trying, or they could do something unprecedented. "I am not sending one ship," she announced. "This is not a token rescue mission to make us feel better about ourselves. This is about showing the galaxy what humans do when innocent people call for help." The Admiral activated the fleet communication system that could reach every human military vessel within 50 light years. Her message was simple and direct. "All available ships report to Sol System immediately for emergency humanitarian mission. This is a priority Alpha mobilization. We have 18 hours to save 300,000 innocent lives." Within the hour, ships began arriving. First came the vessels already in Earth orbit, then the patrol boats from the outer planets. Military transports changed course from supply runs, and exploration ships abandoned their missions to answer the call. The Merchant Marine volunteered their vessels, and even civilian passenger liners offered to help. Captain Nicole Stevens received orders to take command of the rescue fleet from her position aboard the UES Defiance. A massive dreadnought had been designed for war, but today it would serve a different purpose. She watched her tactical display fill with ship markers as humanity's response took shape. "Commander Turner, report to the bridge immediately," she ordered her chief engineer. Alex Turner had designed half the experimental systems on her ship, and she would need his expertise for what came next. The only way to reach the alien colony ship in time was to use technology that had never been tested on this scale. "Commander, we need to get this fleet to these coordinates in less than 18 hours, she told him when he arrived. "What are our options?" Turner studied the navigation data and ran quick calculations on his portable computer. "The experimental jump drives could do it, but the risk is enormous. We are talking about folding space in ways we barely understand. Some ships might not survive the transition." "What are the odds?" Stevens asked. "For a single ship, maybe 60% chance of success. For an entire fleet jumping together, the mathematics become very complicated. We could lose up to 40% of our vessels." Captain Stevens looked out at the growing fleet assembling. Around her ship, dozens of vessels crewed by thousands of humans who had volunteered for this mission, knowing the risks. They came not for glory or profit, but because someone somewhere needed help, and that was enough. "Begin preparations for fleet jump," she ordered. "All ships are to configure their experimental drives and prepare for synchronized spacefold. We are going to bring these people home." The word spread through the fleet that they would attempt something that had never been done before. multiple ships jumping together through folded space to reach an impossible destination in an impossible time. The crews worked frantically to prepare their vessels, while knowing they might not survive the journey. But they would try, because that is what humans do. When someone calls for help, you do not calculate the risks or count the cost. You gather everything you have and you go. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant to send an SOS to Deathworlders. The assembly of ships around Earth grew beyond anything humanity had ever attempted before. Admiral Chong watched from her command center as the fleet took shape on her tactical displays. What had started as a simple rescue mission was becoming something that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. Captain Stevens stood on the bridge of the UEC Science, coordinating with dozens of ship commanders. Each vessel brought different capabilities, and each captain had their own ideas about how to conduct the rescue. The military ships wanted to approach with caution and assess threats. The civilian captains wanted to rush straight to the dying colony ship and start evacuating people immediately. "We need order here, or this becomes chaos," Stevens announced over the fleet communication channel. "I am taking operational command of all vessels participating in this mission. Every ship will follow my orders or return to Earth immediately. Nobody left." Ships that had never worked together before began forming up in organized squadrons. The heavy cruiser UES Vigilant took position alongside civilian passenger liners that had been hastily converted to carry refugees. Hospital ships moved into protective formations, surrounded by destroyers and frigates ready to defend them. Commander Alex Turner worked frantically in the engineering sections, calculating jump coordinates for the entire fleet. The experimental drives had only been tested on single ships under controlled conditions. Now he needed to synchronize dozens of vessels to fold space together and emerge at the same destination at the same time. "The gravitational interactions are incredibly complex," he reported to Captain Stevens. "When this many ships jump simultaneously, they create interference patterns in folded space. Some vessels might emerge thousands of kilometers from the target coordinates." "What about the ships that do not make it through?" Stevens asked the question everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to voice. "The drives could fail completely, leaving ships stranded in normal space," Turner replied honestly. "Or worse, the space fold could collapse while a ship is inside it. That would tear the vessel apart at the molecular level." Stevens looked around. Her bridge at officers who had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might die attempting it. Nobody showed fear or suggested they reconsider. These were humans who had grown up on a planet where survival meant facing impossible odds, and finding ways to overcome them. Dr. Amy Parker arrived on the Defiance with teams of medical specialists from across the Sol system. She had studied alien physiology for years, but had never treated patients from another species. The Cytherian distress beacon included basic biological information, but she would need to learn their medical needs quickly once the rescue began. "We have no idea what diseases they might carry or how their bodies will react to human medicines," she told Captain Stevens during their briefing. "Our medical bays are designed for human patients. We will need to improvise everything." "Doctor, you have the best medical staff in human space and 18 hours to figure it out," Stevens replied. "These people are dying, and we are their only hope. Make it work." Meanwhile, Commander Danny Walsh prepared his fighter squadrons for whatever they might encounter at the destination. The Cytherian distress signal mentioned their location, but gave no information about why their ship had failed or what dangers might be waiting. For all they knew, hostile forces had attacked the colony ship and could still be in the area. All fighter pilots report to briefing rooms for mission preparation. Walsh announced over the ship intercom, "We are going into an unknown situation to rescue civilians. Be ready for anything, but remember our primary mission is to protect the evacuation ships." The pilots who gathered in the briefing rooms were young men and women who had trained for combat but never expected to face it during a humanitarian mission. They studied star charts of the target system and practiced formation flying with ships they had never worked with before. Each squadron would need to adapt quickly to protect vessels designed for exploration and transport rather than battle. Captain Ryan Cooper brought his ship UES Endeavour into formation with the main fleet after loading every piece of emergency life support equipment he could find. His crew had worked through the night, converting cargo holds into temporary living spaces for alien refugees. They stripped out weapons and non-essential systems to make room for as many survivors as possible. "Sir, we can probably handle about 15,000 refugees if we pack them in tight," reported his executive officer, Lieutenant Ben Clark. "The life support systems will be strained, but they should hold long enough to get everyone to safety." Cooper nodded and began calculating how many ships would be needed to evacuate 300,000 people. Even if every vessel in the fleet was converted to maximum refugee capacity, they would barely have enough space. This mission would push human logistics, capabilities beyond anything they had attempted before. The experimental jump drives required massive amounts of power to fold space around an entire fleet. Chief Engineer Turner coordinated with power specialists from every ship to synchronize their energy output. The drives would need to activate simultaneously, creating a single large spacefold rather than dozens of smaller ones. "We get one chance at this," he explained to the engineering teams. "If the timing is off by even microseconds, the gravitational shear could destroy ships caught between fold boundaries. Every drive must activate at exactly the same moment." The countdown began with 16 hours remaining until the Catherian colony ship lost life support completely. Fleet communications buzzed with activity as captains reported their readiness status. Medical teams loaded supplies and prepared treatment areas. Fighter pilots ran final equipment checks and studied intelligence reports about the target system. Admiral Chong transmitted a message to the fleet that would be remembered for generations. "You are about to attempt something that has never been done before. You are risking your lives to save people you have never met from a species you know nothing about. History will record this day as the moment humanity announced to the galaxy what we stand for." The jump drives began their charging sequence, filling space around each ship with twisted gravitational fields. The very fabric of reality bent and warped as human technology prepared to punch through the barriers between normal space and the folded dimensions beyond. Warning alarms sounded on every bridge as power levels climbed toward dangerous levels. Captain Stevens watched her tactical display as ship after ship reported ready status. The U's Vigilant under Captain Katie Moore would lead the military escort. The hospital ship Mercy would coordinate medical operations. Dozens of civilian vessels waited to begin the largest evacuation in galactic history. "All ships report ready for jump," came the final communication from fleet operations. "Drive synchronization is locked and coordinates are confirmed. We jump in 60 seconds. The countdown reached 0, and space exploded with light and energy as 43 human ships folded reality around themselves and vanished from the Sol system. The experimental drives worked exactly as designed, tearing holes through normal space and hurling the entire fleet toward their impossible destination. But space travel at these speeds came with prices that peaceful species had never been willing to pay. 3 ships suffered immediate drive failures as the gravitational stress exceeded their hull integrity. The crews had seconds to evacuate to nearby vessels before their ships were crushed by the collapsing space fold. The remaining fleet continued through folded space racing against time to reach the dying colony ship. Behind them, Earth's orbital stations detected the massive gravitational disturbance created by their departure. The jump drives had worked, But the cost in ships and lives was exactly what the engineers had predicted. In the twisted dimensions of folded space, the human fleet flew toward their destiny. They carried with them the hopes of 300,000 aliens who had no idea help was coming. More importantly, they carried the determination of a species that refused to accept that anyone should die alone in the darkness of space when rescue was possible. The galaxy was about to discover that when Deathworlders received a distress call. They did not send what they could spare. They sent everything they had and more than they thought possible. The Cytherian colony ship had reached out desperately hoping someone might hear their plea for help. What they got in response was an armada. The human fleet emerged from folded space in a cascade of twisted light and gravitational waves that lit up sensor arrays across 3 star systems. Captain Stevens felt the U-East Defiance shudder as reality reasserted itself around her ship. The experimental jump had worked better than anyone had dared hope, but the cost was immediately apparent. Damage report from all ships, she ordered as her crew worked to restore normal operations after the violent transition back to normal space. The bridge displays flickered and stabilized, showing the fleet scattered across several thousand kilometers of space, but mostly intact. 3 ships lost during the jump, sir, reported Communications Officer Jake Rodriguez. The U-East Ranger suffered complete hull failure, and the civilian transport Morning Star was crushed by gravitational shear. The hospital ship Compassion lost main power and is drifting, but her crew is alive. Stevens felt the weight of those losses, but pushed the grief aside. They had known this would happen, and the crews had volunteered anyway. Now she needed to focus on the mission that had cost those brave people their lives. 300,000. Aliens were still dying, and the human fleet was their only hope. Navigation, where are we in relation to the target? She asked, as her officers worked to determine their exact position. The jump drives were accurate, but folded space travel always included some uncertainty about final coordinates. We are 18 hours ahead of schedule and approximately 2 million kilometers from the Cytherian colony ship, came the reply. Long-range sensors are picking up the vessel now. It appears to be drifting without power, just as described in their distress signal. But the sensors also showed something else that changed everything about their mission. The Cytherian ship was not alone in this empty region of space. A formation of 12 warships surrounded the disabled colony vessel in a perfect sphere formation. The ships were sleek and predatory, looking with weapon ports clearly visible along their hulls. Commander Katie Moore aboard the U's Vigilant was the first to identify the hostile vessels. Captain Stevens, those are hegemony military ships surrounding the colony vessel. Configuration suggests a standard salvage operation. They are waiting for the Cytherians to die, so they can claim the ship and cargo without dealing with refugee complications. Stevens felt anger rise in her chest as she understood the situation. These aliens had found the dying colony ship, and instead of helping, they were waiting like vultures for the civilians to suffocate. Then they would strip the vessel of anything valuable and leave the bodies floating in space. All ships' battle stations, she ordered over the fleet communication channel. We have hostile forces surrounding our rescue target. This is no longer just an evacuation mission. We are going to have to fight our way in. The human fleet began organizing itself for combat, even as they continued toward the Cytherian ship. The military vessels moved to the front, while the civilian transports and medical ships formed up behind them. Fighter squadrons launched from their carriers and took escort positions around the vulnerable rescue ships. Commander Danny Walsh led his pilots toward the alien formation, knowing they were outnumbered, but determined to protect the evacuation fleet. His fighters were designed for combat in the gravity wells and radiation fields around Earth. They carried weapons that could function in environments that would destroy most alien technology. All squadrons, this is Phoenix Leader, he transmitted. To his pilots, "We are going up against unknown enemy ships to protect a civilian evacuation. Stay close to the rescue vessels and do not engage unless fired upon. Our job is to keep those transports safe while they save lives." The Hegemony commander, Overlord Vashtek, watched the approaching human fleet with amusement from his flagship bridge. His sensors showed the newcomers were a mixed force of military and civilian vessels with no unified design or apparent battle doctrine. They were clearly from some primitive species that had stumbled into this situation without understanding. Galactic law. "Open communications with the approaching ships," he ordered his communications officer. "I will explain the situation to these ignorant primitives and send them on their way before they cause problems." The transmission reached Captain Stevens a few minutes later, and she listened with growing rage as the alien commander spoke in perfect galactic standard. "Unknown vessels, this system is under Hegemony salvage jurisdiction. The disabled ship you are approaching contains no living beings and is scheduled for resource extraction. Withdraw immediately or face destruction." Stevens looked around her bridge at officers whose faces showed the same fury she felt. These aliens had lied about the colony ship being dead. They knew 300,000 people were dying inside that hull, and they simply did not care. All they wanted was the valuable materials and minerals the Catherians had been carrying to their new home. "Open a channel to the Hegemony commander," she ordered. Her response would be remembered across the galaxy for centuries. "This is Captain Nicole Stevens of the Human Rescue Fleet. You have 30 minutes to withdraw all vessels from this system. We are conducting a humanitarian evacuation and will not tolerate interference." Overlord Vashtek could hardly believe what he was hearing. These humans claimed to represent some rescue organization and were ordering the Hegemony to withdraw from legally claimed salvage. No species had ever challenged Hegemony authority in this sector and survived to tell about it. "Primitive humans, your ignorance of galactic law is amusing but irrelevant," he replied. "My fleet outnumbers your ships 2 to 1 and carries weapons you cannot imagine. Withdraw now or be destroyed with your pathetic rescue mission." But Stevens was no longer listening to the alien commander. She was focused on the tactical display, showing the positions of both fleets and calculating the best approach to break through to the colony ship. Dr. Amy Parker was already organizing medical teams, and Commander Turner was preparing the evacuation. Ships for rapid loading of refugees. "All ships prepare for combat operations," Stevens announced to her fleet. "The enemy has 30 minutes to withdraw. If they are still here when that deadline expires, we will remove them by force. Begin moving toward the colony ship at best possible speed." The human fleet advanced steadily toward their target, while the Hegemony ships maintained their defensive formation. Both sides prepared for battle, but only the humans understood what was really at stake. The aliens saw this as a dispute over salvage rights and valuable cargo. The humans saw it as a fight to save 300,000 innocent lives. Lieutenant Ben Clark aboard the UES Endeavour worked with his captain to prepare their ship for refugee evacuation while simultaneously getting ready for combat. They had converted cargo holds into temporary living spaces, but now they needed to be ready to defend those spaces against alien weapons. "Sir, our shields are configured for rescue operations, not battle," he reported to Captain Cooper. "If we take enemy fire while loaded with civilians, the casualties could be enormous. Then we make sure the military ships keep the enemy busy while we evacuate the colony vessel," Cooper replied. "Our job is to save lives, not win glory. Let the warships handle the fighting." The 30-minute deadline approached while both fleets maneuvered for position. The humans moved steadily toward the colony ship, while the Hegemony vessels tightened their defensive formation. Long-range sensors showed the Catherian ship growing darker as more systems failed and life Support continued to deteriorate. Captain Zektar stood on his dying bridge, watching sensor readings that showed 2 fleets approaching his ship. He could not understand why anyone would fight over a vessel full of dead and dying refugees. His people had nothing valuable except their lives, and most alien species considered those worthless. "Captain, we are receiving a transmission from the approaching human fleet," reported his communications officer with surprise in her voice. "They are requesting permission to begin immediate evacuation of all civilians aboard our ship." Zektar felt hope rising in his chest for the first time in days. Someone had actually come to help them, not to claim their cargo or strip their ship for parts, but to save the lives of his people. He had never heard of humans before, but they were about to become the most beloved species in Catherian history. The 30-minute deadline expired, and Overlord Vashtek prepared to teach these upstart humans a lesson about challenging hegemony. Authority. His ships carried weapons designed to destroy military vessels and reduce planets to rubble. These primitive rescue ships would be vaporized in the first exchange of fire, but the hegemony commander had made a critical error in judgment. He assumed the humans were like every other species in the galaxy, civilized people who would retreat when faced with superior force and accept that some battles could not be won. He was about to discover that humans came from a world where retreat meant death and impossible odds, or just another word for Tuesday. The first shots came from the hegemony flagship as Overlord Vashtek decided to end this confrontation quickly. Brilliant energy beams lanced across space toward the human fleet, expecting to vaporize the primitive rescue ships in a single devastating salvo. The aliens had fought dozens of species, and none had ever withstood their opening attack. Captain Stevens watched the enemy fire approach on her tactical display and gave the order that would change galactic history. All ships evasive maneuvers and return fire. Show these aliens what happens when they threaten innocent people. The human fleet scattered like a swarm of angry hornets, avoiding most of the hegemony fire-through maneuvers that seemed impossible to the watching aliens. Ships that should have been destroyed twisted through space in patterns that defied conventional understanding of physics and engineering. The U.S. Defiance took a direct hit from an enemy beam weapon that would have crippled any normal vessel. Instead, the massive dreadnought shrugged off the attack and returned fire with guns designed to function in the crushing gravity wells of gas giants. The human weapons punched through hegemony shields like they were made of paper. Commander Danny Walsh led his fighter squadrons into the enemy formation with tactics learned in the asteroid belts and radiation storms of the Sol system. His pilots flew through enemy fire that should have killed them instantly, but their ships were built to survive conditions that would destroy most technology. Phoenix Squadron, target the enemy ships blocking access to the colony vessel, he ordered over the combat channel. We need to open a corridor for the evacuation ships. Stay close and watch each other's backs. The hegemony commander watched in shock as his superior fleet began taking casualties from these primitive humans. Their ships were crude and ugly compared to sleek alien designs, but they absorbed damage that should have been fatal and kept fighting. More disturbing was the way human pilots flew their craft with a reckless courage that seemed almost suicidal. Dr. Amy Parker worked frantically to prepare her medical teams while the battle raged around them. The first shuttle was already approaching the Catherian colony ship, where Captain Zektar waited with his dying people. She had no idea what alien physiology would require, but she was determined to save every life possible. Medical teams prepare for mass casualty situations, she announced over the ship intercom. We are dealing with unknown alien biology under combat conditions. Be ready to improvise and adapt. These people are counting on us. The U's Vigilant, under Captain Katie Moore, engaged 3 hegemony cruisers simultaneously using tactics that confused and terrified the enemy commanders. Human ships did not fight like civilized vessels, maintaining safe distances and exchanging fire politely. They closed to point-blank range and used weapons that ignored conventional defensive systems. Target their weapon arrays and disable their ability to interfere with the evacuation. Moore ordered her weapons officer. We do not need to destroy them completely, just stop them from shooting at our rescue ships. But the hegemony ships were not going down easily. Their return fire damaged several human vessels, forcing crews to make emergency repairs while still fighting. A civilian transport Golden Hope took a direct hit that killed 12 crew members, but the ship continued toward the colony vessel to begin evacuating refugees. Captain Ryan Cooper brought the UES Endeavour alongside the massive Cytherian ship and began the most complex docking maneuver in human history. His ship had been designed for exploration, not refugee rescue, but his crew had worked miracles converting cargo holds into temporary living spaces. Docking clamps engaged, sir, reported Lieutenant Ben Clark. We have a seal with the alien ship and are beginning to equalize atmospheric pressure. First contact teams are ready to board. The airlock opened and humans stepped aboard an alien vessel for the first time. The Cytherian ship was dark and cold, with emergency lighting casting eerie shadows down empty corridors. The air was thin and carried strange smells, but it was still breathable for the human rescue teams. Captain Zektar met them at the airlock, with tears streaming down his alien face. He had never seen humans before, but to him it looked like angels sent by whatever gods watched over lost travelers. Behind him stretched long lines of Cytherian civilians, waiting patiently for evacuation. Thank you for coming, he said in broken Galactic Standard. My people were ready to die in the darkness, but you brought light back to our ship. How can we ever repay such kindness? Dr. Parker stepped forward with her medical teams, already scanning the aliens with portable equipment. The Cytherians were tall and thin, with 4 arms and large eyes adapted for low-light conditions. Their biology was similar enough to humans that basic medical care should be possible. We need to move quickly, she told Captain Zektar. Your people are suffering from oxygen deprivation and hypothermia. The children and elderly need immediate treatment. Can you help us organize the evacuation by medical priority? The battle continued to rage outside as more human ships broke through the hegemony defensive line. The aliens had superior numbers and technology, but they fought like civilized beings, trying to minimize their own casualties. The humans fought like the products of a death world, where survival meant accepting any risk necessary. Commander Alex Turner coordinated the evacuation from his position aboard the Defiance, while simultaneously managing damage control from enemy fire. Multiple ships were loading refugees, but the process was slower than hoped. The Cytherians were weak from their ordeal, and many needed medical attention before they could be moved. We have 40,000 people loaded so far, he reported to Captain Stevens. At this rate, we can evacuate everyone in 6 hours, but I do not know if the combat ships can hold the enemy back that long. Stevens looked at her tactical display, showing the ongoing battle. Several human ships had taken serious damage, and 2 fighters had been destroyed. But the hegemony fleet was suffering worse casualties, as human weapons proved devastatingly effective against their defensive systems. All combat ships continue engaging the enemy, she ordered. Do not let them get close to the evacuation vessels. The rescue ships are to ignore everything except loading refugees. We will hold them off as long as necessary. Overlord Vashtek could not understand what was happening to his fleet. The humans fought with technology that seemed primitive, but somehow penetrated every defense his ships possessed. Worse, they showed no concern for their own safety, focusing entirely on protecting their rescue mission. Sir, we have lost 4 ships and 3 more are heavily damaged, reported his tactical officer. The humans are concentrating all fire on vessels. That threatened their evacuation craft. They are treating this like a holy war rather than a simple territorial dispute. The hegemony commander realized he had made a terrible mistake. These were not normal aliens who could be intimidated or reasoned with. These humans were fanatics who would die before abandoning their rescue mission. He had encountered their type before among the more primitive species, but never with such advanced technology. The evacuation continued steadily as human efficiency and organization showed itself under pressure. Medical teams triaged Cytherian patients while loading crews, moved entire families to safety. The civilian transport ships became floating refugee camps as their crews worked miracles finding space for desperate families. Captain Cooper watched the steady stream of aliens boarding his ship and felt pride in what humanity was accomplishing. These people had been abandoned by their own kind and left to die in the cold emptiness of space. Now they were being saved by strangers who had traveled impossible distances to help them. "Sir, we are at maximum capacity," reported Lieutenant Clark. "We have 15,000 refugees aboard and cannot safely take any more. Recommend we begin transport to the nearest safe system." "Negative," Cooper replied firmly. "We do not leave until every single person is off that colony ship. Find more space or make more space, but we are not abandoning anyone." The battle reached its climax as the last hegemony ships realized they were facing defeat. The humans had broken their formation and were systematically destroying any vessel that threatened the evacuation. Alien commanders who had fought dozens of campaigns found themselves outmatched by a species they had never heard of before. But the rescue was far from over. 200,000 Cytherians still waited on their dying ship, while human and alien fleets fought for control of the space around them. The outcome would determine not just the fate of the refugees, but the future relationship between humanity and the Han galactic community. The aliens were learning that when Deathworlders received a distress call, they did not calculate acceptable losses or political complications. They calculated how many ships they could send and how fast they could get there. The battle turned decisively when the hegemony fleet realized they were not just fighting humans, but fighting humanity itself. Each damaged human ship was immediately covered by 2 others, while rescue teams transferred wounded crew members to safety. When the civilian transport Bright Dawn lost its engines, 3 military escorts formed a protective shield around it while continuing the evacuation. Overlord Vashtek watched his tactical display with growing horror as his superior fleet crumbled under the relentless human assault. These aliens did not fight like any species he had encountered before. They ignored their own casualties and focused entirely on protecting the refugee evacuation with a determination that bordered on insanity. "Sir, the humans are not attempting to destroy our fleet," reported his tactical officer with confusion. "They are systematically disabling our weapons and engines while leaving our life support intact. It appears they want to capture us rather than kill us." The hegemony commander could not understand this strategy. In his experience, battles ended when one side was completely destroyed and the survivors surrendered or fled. But the humans seemed content to remove his ships from the fight without actually destroying them completely. Captain Stevens coordinated the final phase of the battle from her position aboard the Defiance. Her fleet had taken casualties, but every human ship remained focused on the primary mission. The evacuation was proceeding faster than anyone had dared hope as human efficiency under pressure showed itself. All combat ships maintained defensive positions around the evacuation zone, she ordered. "Do not pursue fleeing enemy vessels. Our job is to protect the rescue operation, not win a military victory." The last functional hegemony warship finally withdrew from the battle area, leaving the humans in complete control of the space around the dying colony vessel. But Captain Stevens felt no satisfaction in the military victory. Her attention was focused entirely on the massive logistical challenge of moving 300,000 refugees to safety. Dr. Amy Parker worked tirelessly in the medical bays, treating Cytherian patients with conditions she had never seen before. The aliens were suffering from severe malnutrition and oxygen deprivation after days aboard their failing ship. Many of the elderly and children needed immediate intensive care to survive. We are seeing respiratory problems caused by the failing atmospheric processors, she reported to Captain Stevens. The Cytherians have been breathing increasingly toxic air for almost a week. Some of the children may have permanent lung damage. But human medical teams adapted quickly to alien physiology using scanners and diagnostic equipment to understand Cytherian biology. Within hours, they had developed treatment protocols that saved lives even though they were working with completely unfamiliar patients. Captain Zektar moved through the human ships amazed by what he saw. The aliens who had come to save his people were converting every available space into temporary housing for refugees. Military vessels designed for war became floating shelters where Cytherian families found safety and hope. "Your people are performing miracles," he told Captain Cooper, as they watched the steady stream of civilians boarding the U.S. Endeavour. "We expected perhaps 1 or 2 ships might answer our distress call. Instead, you brought an entire fleet and fought a battle to save us." Cooper looked around at his crew, working alongside Cytherian refugees to organize the evacuation. Humans and aliens who had never met before were cooperating to save lives with an efficiency that impressed even him. "When someone calls for help, you do not send just enough," he replied. "You send everything you have." The evacuation continued for 18 hours as human ships loaded refugees with mechanical precision. Every vessel in the fleet was packed beyond normal capacity, but nobody complained about the crowded conditions or limited resources. The Cytherians had been facing death, and now they were safe aboard ships heading toward their homeworld. Commander Alex Turner performed logistical miracles, coordinating the movement of hundreds of thousands of people across dozens of ships. The human fleet had become a mobile city, carrying an entire alien population to safety, while maintaining life support systems designed for much smaller crews. Final count shows 297,436 refugees successfully evacuated, he reported to Captain Stevens with exhaustion, but pride in his voice. "We lost approximately 2,000 people who died before we could reach them, but we saved everyone else." Stevens felt the weight of those casualties, but also the satisfaction of an impossible mission accomplished. The human fleet had traveled across impossible distances using experimental technology to save the lives of people they had never met. 300,000 aliens were alive because humanity had decided their lives mattered. The journey to the Cytherian homeworld took 6 weeks, with the refugee-laden human ships traveling slowly to avoid stressing their overloaded life support systems. During the long voyage, humans and Cytherians learned about each other's cultures and formed friendships that would last for generations. Captain Zektar spent hours talking with human officers about their motivations for attempting such a dangerous rescue mission. He could not understand why an entire species would risk their lives for strangers from another world. The humans had gained nothing from the rescue except the satisfaction of saving lives. "On our world, we have a saying," Captain Stevens explained to the Cytherian captain during one of their conversations. "When someone falls into a river, you do not calculate whether they are worth saving. You jump in and pull them out, because that is what decent people do." The human fleet arrived at the Cytherian homeworld to find a celebration unlike anything in their species' history. Millions of aliens gathered to welcome home the refugees and thank the humans who had saved them. The story of the rescue had spread across Cytherian space, creating legends about the brave Deathworlders who answered their call for help. Admiral Chang received reports of a successful mission from her headquarters on Earth. The human fleet had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history by conducting the largest civilian evacuation ever attempted while fighting off hostile forces. More importantly, they had announced humanity's arrival on the galactic stage in a way that would be remembered forever. The rescue operation changes everything about how other species view humanity, she told the Seoul Defense Council during their debriefing session. We are no longer unknown aliens from a distant world. We are the species that saves people when nobody else will help. Word of the Catherian rescue spread rapidly through galactic communication networks, reaching dozens of species within months. The story was always the same and always amazing. Humans had received a distress call from complete strangers and responded with overwhelming force, not to conquer or claim territory, but simply to save lives. The political implications were enormous. As species across the galaxy realized that humanity represented a new type of civilization, most advanced races had evolved beyond the primitive instinct to risk everything for strangers. Humans seemed to consider such risks a moral obligation rather than dangerous foolishness. Within a year, the Human Rescue Service became a formal organization, with bases throughout human space and mutual aid agreements with dozens of alien species. Ships carrying the HRS insignia became welcome sites at disaster zones and conflict areas where other governments feared to send help. The hegemony never again challenged a human rescue operation. Overlord Vashtek survived the battle and eventually wrote a military analysis of human combat capabilities that became required reading at alien war colleges. His conclusion was simple and terrifying for potential enemies. Humans do not fight to win battles. They fight to protect what they consider important. This makes them essentially undefeatable when defending something they care about. Captain Zektar remained friends with the human officers who had saved his people for the rest of his long life. He often told the story of that desperate night when his colony ship sent out its final distress call, hoping someone somewhere might hear their plea for help. We thought we were sending a message into empty space, he would conclude his tale. What we were really doing was calling the one species in the galaxy that considers impossible rescue missions a moral imperative. The SOS reached Deathworlders, and they did not send aid. They sent an armada. The galaxy had learned its lesson about humanity. When Deathworlders received a distress call, they did not calculate acceptable losses or political complications. They calculated how many ships they could send and how fast they could get there. And they always sent more than seemed possible because someone out there needed help, and that was reason enough.